Hello and welcome to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio. Researched and written in Indianapolis by Adrian Peterson and produced in the studios of WRMI Shortwave in Miami. I'm Jeff White. Today begins a new transmission period. This is the beginning of the B14 season, so many shortwave stations are changing times and frequencies as of today. Well, on today's program, the 100th anniversary of the Panama Canal, the radio story, Part 1. We'll have DX news from Australia and India, and another unusual, rare, unique QSL card. Quite recently, we discovered an important anniversary from a couple of months earlier that had escaped our attention. The official opening of the Panama Canal in Central America to shipping traffic occurred on August 15, 1914. And here we are a little over 100 years later, and we have not yet presented a feature on this important anniversary. Let us catch up on this highly significant world event, and so here in Wavescan today, we present this slightly delayed feature on the story of the Panama Canal, together with Part 1 of the radio history in the American-administered Panama Canal Zone. With our story, here's Ray Robinson.
Yes, hello everyone. We go back to the beginning and we discover that the first suggestion for digging a canal across Central America to link the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans came from the Spanish in the year 1529. Of course, back then the technical capability was quite limited and there was no practical way in which this concept could be implemented. In the year 1821, the Central American colony of Panama broke away from Spain, declared its independence from European control, and joined South American Colombia, which, conjoined, ultimately emerged as the Republic of New Granada. However, 82 years later, on November 3, 1903, Panama split off from Colombia and thus became an independent nation in its own right. It was in 1826 that the United States began preliminary negotiations with New Granada for the construction of a canal, though the French actually began construction work on the canal in the territory of Panama a little over half a century later. Just 2 weeks after Panamanian independence, on November 3, 1903, the United States and Panama signed a treaty on November 18th, establishing the Panama Canal Zone. This zone was administered as an American territory, and it encompassed 553 square miles in a swathe of jungle territory 10 miles wide, plus all of the lakes and waterways that feed into the canal. During its three-quarter-of-a-century tenure, the zone issued its own postage stamps, some of which were overprinted Panamanian and American stamps, though the valid currency, generally speaking, was the American dollar. Nearly 50,000 men from all around the world were employed in canal construction, large numbers of whom died from poor hygiene, deadly jungle snakes, and a multitude of diseases, including malaria from the mosquito-infected jungles. In 1906 alone, 80% of the workforce were hospitalized at some time or another for malaria. Work on the Panama Canal was completed in 10 years, and the official opening took place 100 years ago on August 15, 1914, when the cargo ship SS Ancon traversed the entire system. However, the first ship to traverse the canal was a pleasure boat called the La Sarta, which made the unofficial voyage during the day before. The highest fee ever paid for use of the canal was more than $250,000 by the cruise ship Norwegian Pearl in 2010, and the lowest fee ever was paid by American Richard Halliburton, who swam the full distance of the canal in 1928. This epic swim took 50 hours of swimming spread out over 10 days, and it cost him just 36 cents. These days, more than 30 ships traverse the 8-hour journey through the canal each day. The Panama Canal Zone was taken over by the government of Panama on October 1, 1979, and once again the two sides of Panama were joined together into a single country. The Panama Canal Zone, which for example had a population of 45,000 in 1970, was no longer an American territory. The first wireless station in the Panama Canal Zone was installed by Dr. Lee DeForest for the United States Navy near the Atlantic entrance to the canal at Colon in 1906. and it was on the air originally under the call sign SL. The 35 kilowatt long-wave Spark wireless transmitter operated on 1250 meters or 240 kilohertz. A couple of years later, a 100 kilowatt Spark transmitter was installed and the call sign was regularized to an American Navy call sign NAX. This station was in regular usage up until the 1930s. The United States Navy operated two other wireless stations in the Panama Canal Zone, stations NNL at Coco Solo and NBA at Balboa. The Coco Solo station was located at a submarine base, and it was on the air in the 1920s. Additionally, the US Army also operated half a dozen wireless stations in the Canal Zone, and these were located at Army camps. They were on the air under Army call signs such as WUCG at Fort de Lesseps, WUCH at Fort Sherman, and WUCI at Fort Randolph. The two best-known wireless or radio stations in the Panama Canal Zone were the Navy Communications Station NBA at Balboa and the Army Broadcasting Station at Quarry Heights. And that's the story next time, when we present part 2 of the story about radio broadcasting in the Panama Canal Zone.
Thank you, Ray Robinson of KVOH in Los Angeles. To mark the 100th anniversary of the Panama Canal Zone, the Panama Canal Authority issued a song and a video. It's just 1 minute long, it's in Spanish, and we're going to listen to it now.
El sudor de muchas razas abrió la tierra, ingenio venció entre hombre y naturaleza. Y un 15 de agosto cruzó el Ancón, luego el coraje hizo bandera e inspiró a una nación. Y hoy sigues creciendo en mis manos, trabajando día y noche innovamos para que jueguen sanos más chiquillos. Y por tu ruta de orgullo el mundo entero corte camino. Fiesta de culturas que funden progreso. Hombre y naturaleza celebran el respeto. 100 años cumpliendo metas, 100 años con puertas abiertas.
You're listening to Wavescan from Adventist World Radio. Send your comments and reception reports to Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229 in the United States. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229 in the USA. Or you can email us at wavescan@awr.org. Our email once again, wavescan@awr.org.
Next on Wavescan today, let's go to Prithviraj Purkayastha in Jorhat, India, with some DX news from that part of the world.
Hello DXers friends around the world. First, I would like to greet all my Indian friends around the world on the occasion of Festival of Lights, Deepavali. Friends, today I would like to share with you about some of my recent DX logs which I monitored during past few days. Radio Exceedier, the Espana, has recently ceased its shortwave transmission and their last English broadcast on shortwave was heard on October 14th around 1930 UTC on 9665 kHz with SINPO 44344. It is really very sad that another historic European radio station has shut down its window for the airwaves. Another bad news is that Deutsche Welle, the popular station from Germany, has also announced to close down its Urdu service to Pakistan and Indian subcontinent from coming winter broadcast season. Radio Kuwait from Middle East region was heard in Urdu on 15540 kHz from 1630 UTC in much better reception these days. Their main program contents are news and news-based magazine programs, music, cultural and religious magazine programs. KBS World Radio in English is heard on 9515 and 9640 kHz between 16 to 17 hour UTC in English with nice reception here in northeastern India. Radio Taiwan International in English is heard on 15485 kHz from 16 to 17 hour UTC with SINPO 44444. Radio Taiwan is inviting all its listeners to interact more in form of letters and email and offering many souvenirs for lucky listeners. Adventist World Radio in English with their DX program Webscan is heard on 15670 kHz from 1530 UTC with good signal. NHK World Radio Japan in Bengali is coming clear these days on 11685 kHz between 13 to 1345 UTC. The transmitter site is Krenji in Singapore and the transmitter power is 250 kW. Bhutan Broadcasting Corporation BBS is heard back again after a long silence on 6035 kHz in the morning and evening hours in northeastern India. The program are in vernacular and English language and mainly contains talks, music and news etc. The faulty BBS transmitter was recently fixed with the technical help of All India Radio engineers. Radio Myanmar is always coming loud and clear in English in northeastern India on 9730 kHz between 7 to 727 UTC. News, music and socio-cultural programs are their main contents. And the new winter broadcast schedule will be starting from 26th October and here are some changed broadcast schedule of couple of stations. Radio Veritas Asia's Bengali service can be heard between 0030 to 0057 UTC on 15265 kHz and between 14 to 1427 UTC on 11870 kHz. Radio Veritas Asia Hindi service can be heard between 0030 to 0057 UTC on 15280 kHz and 1330 to 14 hour UTC on 11870 kHz. Adventist World Radio in Hindi can be heard in India weekdays between 1530 to 16 hour UTC on 15250 kHz and 11955 kHz. The English transmission of AWR can be heard on weekdays on 16 to 1630 UTC on 11780 kHz and 11690 kHz. Between 1530 to 16 hour UTC on 11750 kHz except Fridays and Saturdays, and between 1630 to 17 hour UTC on 15360 kHz on Monday, Wednesday and Fridays. And friends, with this I would like to conclude this edition of DX Report from India and I hope you liked it. For correct reception reports for this edition of IDXR, we will issue our special smallest QSLs, which will be world's smallest QSL in size till today. Please send your reception reports and feedbacks to Indian DX Report, Post Box number 100, Jorhat HPO, Jorhat 785001, Assam, India. Or you can send your comments and feedbacks at indiandxreport@gmail.com. Until next time friends, with goodbye and 73s from Assam.
Thank you, Prithviraj. And from India we go to Australia now. Here's Bob Padula in Melbourne.
Greetings to shortwave enthusiasts around the world. This is Bob Padula in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, with another edition of the Australian DX Report. These magazines provide news of shortwave broadcasting stations, monitoring summaries, propagation news, and other information concerning world international broadcasting. As I start to remind you that full detailed QSLs are available for correct reports received for these episodes. The address will be given at the end of the program. And to note that All times, days and dates given in our episodes are in UTC, and we use the 24-hour time system. The episodes are compiled from resources made available by the Electronic De-Express Radio Monitoring Association, which is based here in Melbourne. Our program this time consists of our solar activity report, news about international shortwave broadcasting stations, and monitoring observations made here in Eastern Australia. First of all, solar activity. The latest report from the Ionospheric Prediction Service in Sydney, New South Wales, here in Australia, advises that solar activity is now classified as low. The 10.7 centimetre solar radio flux has fallen to 126, that's 126, and the daily equivalent sunspot number has dropped to 79, that's 79. And those figures are expected to decrease even further in the immediate future, with drops of the solar flux down to as low as 115, 115, and the equivalent smooth sunspot number falling to 66. So we're now in the plateau of solar cycle 24, and it may well be that the plateau has passed. It was originally predicted that the current cycle would flatten out in November, that's November this month coming, and the peak has actually been lower than recent sunspot cycles. So it just means that long distance propagation will continue to be quite unsatisfactory on long haul multi-hop paths on frequencies above about 14 megahertz for darkness or semi-darkness paths, but those frequencies will be satisfactory on daylight circuit paths. Now, the most important news this week, of course, is the announcement by the Spanish Foreign Radio that its overseas services on shortwave, that's the Radio Exterior de España in all languages, closed down on October 15. So it's going to mean a lot of frequencies missing from the shortwave bands from that date. So that information has come from various sources, including an announcement on the station by the station itself. So October 15 is the close-off date or the close-down date for shortwave services of the Spanish Foreign Radio. Some information now concerning the Vatican Radio. According to a report in the American online service known as National Security, Breitbart V, it's a weblog, the author says that the writing is on the wall for Vatican Radio, which can expect substantial downsizing as the Media Commission works towards a reform of Vatican communications operations. A committee of experts met recently in the Vatican Radio to study Vatican communications, and it's been charged specifically with proposing how Vatican media outlets can effectively reach more people and how operating costs can be reduced. Among its targets for cost cutting, Vatican Radio stands front and centre. Vatican Radio is itself represented on the commission in the person of Giacomo Ghissani, who was in charge of international relations for the radio. With more than 400 employees and expenses of $37 million a year, while collecting less than $1 million in advertising, Vatican Radio accounts for a significant portion of the Holy See's yearly deficit. Vatican Radio only began accepting commercial advertising in 2009 in an effort to cover some of its extensive budget. As a point of comparison, operating costs for Vatican Radio are higher than the combined budgets of staffing and running all Vatican embassies in 113 nations around the world, which run to just over $30 million. Back in July, Cardinal George Pell, who heads up the recently created Vatican Secretariat for the Economy, and is ultimately responsible for the overhaul of Vatican communications, said it was in 1931 when Vatican Radio was set up. No longer in most parts of the world do people listen very frequently to the radio. And Lord Christopher Patten, chairman of the 11-person advisory committee, gave an interview to Vatican Radio in which he outlined his vision for media reorganisation. Speaking with an operation that is under investigation, Patten hastens to assure his interviewer of his appreciation for the work of the radio. We all know how important shortwave radio still is, Patten said, in communication with some of the poorest groups around the world, particularly in Africa and Asia. Still, Patten noted that the media finds itself having to run constantly to keep up with changing technology. One is aware of the extent to which the young receive information in a different way to which I've received it traditionally. He further acknowledged that we want to make sure that the Vatican's resources, which aren't limitless, are spent as effectively as possible. The question of efficiency has come up over and over again. Cardinal Penn has said that currently expenditures within the Vatican in no way correlate to the number of people who are reached. In point of fact, some of the newer media, such as the Vatican's website, news.va, and the Pope's Twitter account, are reaching more people despite their modest operating budgets. Together, they account for less than 5% of the budget. Next to them, Vatican Radio and the Vatican newspaper, which reach far few people yet cost immensely more, look like outdated behemoths. Vatican Radio saw huge expansion during the reign of polyglot Pope John Paul II. In the 7-year period from 1980 to 1987 alone, the radio broadened its news service, recruiting 50 journalists of 20 nationalities. The cost of running the radio doubled in the same period, from $8.5 million in 1980 to approximately $17 million in 1987. Vatican Radio now broadcasts on 5 continents in 40 different languages. Since its inception, Vatican Radio has been entrusted to the Jesuit order to which Pope Francis belongs, and its director is Father Federico Lombardi, who was also the head of the Vatican Press Office. The committee has set the date of next Easter to come up with proposals for the reorganisation. So that's an account taken from the National Security weblog Breitbart B, written in the USA. So wait and see what happens next year with the Vatican Radio and how it affects broadcast on shortwave. And that's all we have time for in our episode of the Australian DX Report, which came to you from Melbourne in Victoria, Australia. I'd just like to remind you that we offer full detail QSL cards showing Australian scenes and wildlife for correct reports received for these broadcasts. We also offer an email QSL service for reports sent via the internet or email. Full details about the QSL service are available at the Electronic DXpress homepage, which is simply edxp.org. So until our next program, this is Bob Padula in Melbourne in Victoria, Australia, wishing you all good listening. Thanks for being with us and good DX. See you soon.
Thank you, Bob. Our unusual, rare, unique QSL for this week is a QSL card received by Thomas Drescher in Germany. On August 26, 1977, he was listening to a broadcast from Adventist World Radio, AWR Europe, that was on the air from a 250 kilowatt transmitter at Radio Trans Europe in Sines, Portugal. This QSL card was unique for Thomas Drescher because he himself designed the card. Back more than a quarter century ago, AWR Europe staged a listener contest in which listeners were invited to design a QSL card. The Drescher card shows a large red flame signifying the ministry of the Holy Spirit on a black background, and AWR identification is printed as a white breakthrough in the background. Perhaps other listeners who also designed a QSL card for AWR back then, are holding a QSL card of their own design. Well, thanks for listening to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio, researched and written in Indianapolis by Dr. Adrian Peterson. Next week, North of the Stone Wall, Part 2 in the Scotland radio story. Also our Japan DX reports, and much more. Several QSL cards are available for your reports on this program. Send your AWR and KSDA reception reports for Wavescan to the AWR address in Indianapolis that we'll give you in a moment, and also to the station your radio is tuned to, KVOH, WWCR, or WRMI, or to the AWR relay stations that carry Wavescan. Remember, too, that you can send a reception report to each of the DX reporters when their segment is on the air here in Wavescan. Japan, Bangladesh, Philippines, Australia, and India. They will verify with a colorful QSL card. Return postage and an address label are always appreciated. The Wavescan address is Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. Our email address is wavescan@awr.org. That's wavescan@awr.org. I'm Jeff White at WRMI in Miami. Until next week, we leave you with a song about the Panama Canal. In English, these are the Animaniacs from a Warner Brothers animated TV series, telling about their experience sailing the Panama Canal.
Got a tramp steamer, my ship's called Hal.
40 miles on the Panama Canal.
Got a cargo of sodas, they are local.
40 miles on the Panama Canal.
Sailing across the Caribbean Sea to the Pacific in a jiffy through Panama, but not on land. I'd look silly with my ship in the sand.
Yo, Hal, try the canal. Yo, Hal, the canal is your pal. You can sail a cargo ship from sea to shining sea through the Panama Canal for a nominal fee.
You enter a lock, it's a ship corral.
40 miles on the Panama Canal.
You pay your money, then get a decal.
40 miles on the Panama Canal.
You cross the locks, they number 3, full of water for you and me. 100 feet wide, 41 feet deep, water enough to drench a sheet.
High lock, up goes the ship. Low lock, the ship takes a dip. First there is the water level, then lower it again. Cross the Panama Canal, it's really zen.
We pass the locks with good morale.
40 miles on the Panama Canal.
The crew yells out,
Thank you, Hal! 40 miles on the Panama Canal.
You're welcome, men. Wasn't that fun? 40 miles, our voyage is done. From Colon now, past Balboa. Adios, Panama, so long, aloha.